Firstly, I'd like to thank Iqbal for hosting this and for his very generous comments at the back. He was one of the first to read the whole book before it was published, so thank you very much for that, for those comments. Secondly, I'd like to thank you all for coming here, because we live in busy lives. Making the time out, especially if it's a long day of work coming here, it's not easy. And I was actually talking to a scholar yesterday, and he was saying that actually, people generally were quite lazy, in the sense that after work we want to go home, we want to relax. We've got our own commitments. So massive thank you for coming here and giving your time to listen to what I think is actually a very, very important sort of content that I want to share. And inshallah, hopefully, when you read the book, it'll look like it's important as well. So I think before when I had this in mind, I thought I was going to, being a kind of a slide jockey at work, I thought I was going to take you through something like 20 slides. I sent them to Iqbal and said, these are too dense. And I know why he said that, because I'm actually a systems thinker, so I think in holistic systems. Okay, I don't just put out one thing there and then expect people to kind of accept that. I will look at one thing and then look at how that fits into the wider context. It's a kind of, if you're into philosophy, it's a kind of a post-structuralist kind of thinking. And it's kind of the thinking that you see in the Quran as well all the time. Allah's relating different things, and the scholars also, they relate different things, and they try and create a holistic idea of what it is that Allah is talking to us about. So that's why, I scrapped the slides. Okay, so I'm going to now kind of do a bit of freestyling, and I think the best place to start is kind of saying, what is this book about? So to explain that, I want to kind of give you a view of what are the pervasive headwinds that as Muslims, and forget about the kind of identity and the nature of Muslims, but just the word Muslim and Islam, these things, what context do they fit into? What are the pervasive headwinds challenging these two things, Muslims and Islam? So when I look at this, there's 4 different things that I place it, and the book actually sits into one segment. So these sections are, these sort of themes are, the first one being kind of the bias against Muslims and Islam that we see, okay? Now, some of that is going to be perceived bias, some of that is going to be real. But in any case, that exists. We know in the media portrays Muslims in a negative way, and we know that there's been a history of securitization in terms of the way government policy has interacted with Muslim communities. We also know that this idea of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hatred that exists. So there's this segment of headwinds, a pervasive headwind around sort of negativity and the negative portrayal and bias against Muslims and Islam. That's one sort of pervasive headwind. The second one I would say is slightly different. People actually don't know how to distinguish between the two. But the second one is around the antithesis we have against organized religion. So in the West, survey after survey from different surveyors, what they've found is that generally against organized religion, there is a natural tendency to dislike it. Okay, so something like one survey from the Pew Research Institute, they found that about 10% of the UK say that religion is very important to them. So it's not just Islam, it's religion generally. When you think about God, religion, they're a bit antagonistic. So that's kind of the second sort of pervasive headwind. The third pervasive headwind is around the socio-economic and intergenerational challenges and integration sort of challenges that we face. So that, as most of us here would be sort of second, third generation Muslims in the UK, and that has there's a lot of intergenerational issues associated with that. We also have socioeconomic issues. In any survey that we have of socioeconomics, we tend to be at the bottom of the pile. Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, and Somalis. So there's that contention that we have to face. That's another pervasive headwind. And there's a fourth one. Okay. So by the way, those 3 I've mentioned, people when they look at them, they look at it in one massive sort of problem. When you do that, you can't see with the wood for the trees. You can't see how things interrelate and what things you need to segment or segregate out when you're looking at something. So, but these are the 3, you can distinguish these 3 things. And the fourth thing is what I call the unresolved contentions around ethnocentric religion and identity politics. And explain what that is. But that's actually the fourth thing. These are all four different sort of areas. And one of the things that I think is if we focus on the fourth one, then it will give us a much better way of tackling some of these other things. We will be able to bring new paradigms of thinking, new ideas, fresh perspectives into all of these other three things that we, sort of three other pervasive headwinds that exist. So what do I mean by this fourth unresolved contention? And as the book sort of highlights, it's kind of ethnocentric religion and identity politics. Let me explain what ethnocentric religion is, because there's in the chapter, as you'll see, there's lots of examples. The whole book is just one example after another. But there's some specific ones as well. So if you have any questions about that, you can see specific and more broader ones in there. So ethnocentric religion, what is that? I'll just give you an eye-opener to this. 20 years ago, most of the times when we would have been speaking either in public or amongst ourselves, right? By the way, those of us who have been alive for 20 years ago, probably I can see a lot of young people as well. So we probably would have identified ourselves as British Pakistanis, British Somalis, British Bangladeshis, maybe adding Muslim at the end as well. So there would have been this thing, British and an ethnic sort of identification. We would have done it, we would have self-identified like that, and actually externally others would also self-identify, would have identified us as that as well. So it's kind of working in both ways. We would have done this. Fast forward 20 years, now, the way we are telling people that we are British Muslims, okay? But if we look in our communities, what's happening in our communities and the way our communities are organized, and we're still ethnically rooted. So we still have this, the Bangladeshi, Pakistani, the Somali, the, Nigerian. We have the Arab. We're rooted still in our ethnic identities on the ground. So what's happened here? We've gone from an ethnic identification to a religious one, but yet in our communities we're still very much ethnically rooted. So why is that? So this book actually looks at that. And then the second thing is, and he also says, okay, if that is the case, how should we, how do we draw the inspiration to really call ourselves Muslim, and what does that mean? What does that mean for us? And over the last few years, there's more people, more Muslims in the UK who've been born in the UK than abroad. So there's a kind of a shift there as well happening. And if you stretch it out to 2050, the projections, most projections, and the projection I've used in the book is probably one of the most conservative projections. Today we are 5% in the UK in terms of Muslims. In 2050 it's going to be 10%. It's going to be double that. So there's going to be, so the question is, if today we're calling ourselves British Muslims, and in 30 years time there's going to be more Muslims, how do we make sense of this? We're still rooted in our ethnic identities. When we go forward, what does that mean for us? How do we go forward? That's basically, this book covers that. And then the other aspect of the book covers is identity politics. So by that I mean things like, we've got intra-Muslim identity politics. So for instance, this cuts across both on a kind of a theological sort of grounds as well as ethnic grounds. So we've got sort of, you guys would have been quite familiar, Sufi, Salafi, you got the Barelvi, Deobandi, identity politics that we have. But also now, more recently, we have sort of fiqh politics. So for instance, if you happen to go with a marginal fiqh position on something, then suddenly you might be labeled as liberal, progressivist, modernist. So you got all of this kind of identity politics going on, intra-Muslim. Then you've got on the external side, so when we're now in the public facing side, where we talk about Islam, we're actually, if you look at the Islamophobia definition as an example, it's talking about this idea of Muslimness, but then it doesn't really define what Muslimness is. It's a kind of assuming that if you're brown, then you're Muslim, and so it's the brownness which we're trying to protect. So there's all of these kind of things now coming in, which when we're engaging in the public, we've got this sort of racialization of Islam and Muslims that's going on. Plus also you've got this idea of when we talk about Islam in the public, you know, are we talking at the level of the human level or the spiritual level, theological level? What levels are we talking? Or are we just talking about we want to just protect our ground? Because this is also coming in increasingly. So the book actually covers a lot of this, and the book, the way it tackles it is it looks at contentions. What are these contentions in this area, in these sort of topics? And it's segmented into 3 sections, though. So the first one, faith, reason, and progress. Second one being religion in society, and the third one is around integration and identity politics. And then at the end, it makes some conclusions. And right at the end, it proposes a charter for British Muslims. Because if we really want to be Muslim, okay, we kind of, this book covers that, we want to be able to see what is it that God is asking of us to be Muslim. Because Islam and being Muslim isn't just an identity. You know, we know if you try and be, and the purpose of this, my talk here, my short talk, how am I doing time? My short talk here isn't to build a paradigm of how do we define ourselves, but I'm just going to give you a snippet. So we have, you know, within sort of Islamic identity, kind of let's take it as a general term. We have elements of kind of the physical markers which may give us identity. Physical markers, right? The fact that maybe we're wearing a hijab or wearing a thobe or something like that gives us a physical appearance, physical marker of being Muslim. Then you've got sort of the kind of the actions, right? So the actions we take, and those actions can be segmented into kind of narrow things as well as broad things. So narrow things are like the 5 pillars, okay? Nobody else prays 5 times a day, no one goes to the Hajj. You know, the 5 pillars give us an identity, okay? That's that kind of from our actions. You can call it the a'mal. And then also, you've got the broad things as well, which don't necessarily define us only of our religious identity, but they give us some sense of identity. So for instance, you know, being kind, generous. You don't have to be religious from an organized religion point of view to be kind and generous and warm and all that kind of stuff, which the religion imbibes this kind of character. So you've got this sort of actions which give us some identity. But and then the other thing is which a lot of us miss is this idea of being Muslim, the hal, the state of being Muslim, and that's all sort of our connection with Allah. You know, niyyah, having intention before we do things, ikhlas, these are all things to do with something which isn't, these are concealed from the outside. But nevertheless, in our Islamic sort of paradigm of identity, what is identity, those things are important to us. So if we have this Islamic paradigm of identity, but yet we're calling ourselves British Muslims, and yet we haven't really thought about any of this sort of paradigm of how Islam constructs identity, what's actually going on? So what the book says is, look, if you want to get to that place, then it proposes a 7 sort of points as a kind of a starting charter, a baseline, which says, look, if we start doing these things, these principles, and doing whatever we want to do based on these principles, then actually we can get to that point where we can call ourselves British Muslims and be comfortable. It doesn't matter which way we segment it. So I won't say any more. I think I'm going to open up for questions, and hopefully that's given a small glimpse into what the book is about.